I'd just like to hear from you a little bit about who you are. And I find you and your background so very interesting. Maybe you could share with us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. I wished I was a professional driver. I'm only the pro in the go-kart race. I'm just a professional commentator because when I was a little kid, my dad got to the point where I was going to be put in go-kart racing, and mom threatened to divorce him if that happened. So my driving career was cut off when I was about 10 years old. But no, it's a lot better to tell the story than to be the story. So my role week in and week out is to be there amongst the action, to interview everybody involved in racing. And I mean that not just the drivers, but the crew members, anyone from the teams that'll talk to me, and tell the stories that are going on, not just the obvious ones, but everyone's got a story worth listening to. So trying to find who the best people are for any given weekend, and maybe those who deserve a little bit more attention.
But I think sometimes our voice can get either lost or a little more loud in a space where we might be, somewhat unique. But I think it's also unique to be talking about mental health in the space of a high energy environment like professional race car driving. Maybe you can talk a little bit about, these in the moment and the skills that are required to be top of their game. And they are. Everybody that participates in the MSO Michelin GT Challenge at VIR and all the pedigrees are amazing. The folks that come, and each year we've done the karting for CKG. I'm so amazed at how regular people the pro drivers really are. And there's lots of stories that come out about, just our collective humanity and the fact we need to be able to talk about mental health. But for me as a layperson, race car driving and mental health don't exactly always come together. I wonder if you can comment on that a little bit for us.
Well, sure. It's really interesting because to be the best in any industry and any sport, you have to be mentally composed and you have to be at the peak of that at all points in time. I mean, there are drivers, for example, who go to a racetrack and know that they haven't done well at that track in the past, and then continue to not do well at that track because their heads just aren't in the right space. In terms of mental health, there is no shortage of necessity to try and get the word out that everyone struggles. Everyone has that voice of self-doubt. And the problem is that not everyone talks about it, so not everyone knows it exists. In racing, you can't be mentally fragile or you don't last. And the same is true for broadcasting. If you don't have thick skin, that's one thing. But if you don't have your head in the right place either, there's no way you can be listening to someone talking in your ear while you're speaking and then also be getting other information in the other ear. Your brain simply can't process it, and you want to shut down and just curl up into a little ball. The race car drivers who are at their best, not necessarily in the top class even, just at the forefront of each of these championships, they've got a different gear that they can go to in their brains. And it's not that they're special, it's that they've learned how to do that. Whereas that's something that everybody can learn how to do. You just need to talk about it more.
That's right. And I love what you said about, you really have to be in the present moment. I know that, near and dear to the Richmond, Virginia audience is Coach Shaka Smart, who led one of our VCU Rams basketball team to the Final Four. And he used to have this term he used, but it's called, you need to be parallel with time. Come here and be parallel with time. And so if his players were worried about their girlfriend or their test or something, they aren't parallel with time, what's happening right now, and they couldn't then perform. And, I think about teens who, it's just so hard to be a teen in general, but as you're called to perform all day, either at school or at your job or as a brother or sister or as a friend or as a teammate, it's, if your mind is really encompassed with things that are just not happening now, the kind of misery that comes in and some of the unnecessary suffering because we just haven't really built the skills yet. And that's what's so cool about having this conversation with you, Shea, and you kind of representing a certain sector of our population that's kind of niche, is that we all have mental health, we all have to learn the same skills to be able to perform our job. And, whereas being a professional race car driver or fan or broadcast person, it's still you're an individual who has to go through certain habits that are fine-tuned for you, separate and things that you do. And I wondered, Shea, you've been in front of the camera a lot. You also run something called the Gearbox Girl. And you portray and communicate to people on screen, on paper, in your professional life. And I just wonder if you have certain things you do to keep yourself parallel with time.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the funny thing is that my brain kind of goes into a weird state when I'm in a race weekend. And frequently, my mom, for example, will give me grief because a weekend will finish and she'll go, "So how was it? Did you enjoy it?" And I'll say, "I don't know. I haven't processed it yet."
Yeah.
Because you experience it. You're very much parallel to time. You're in the moment, you're going through everything. And you can't let emotion interfere with what you're doing as far as work is. So you very much have to compartmentalize everything. As far as a mentally healthy way to do it, that's the only way that I've learned, is you enjoy everything as you're going through it, but you don't necessarily reflect on it as it's happening. You kind of put it away somewhere else, because if you're reflecting on it, you then come a step behind. The racing is here and you're still back here. And that doesn't really work. So from a fan's perspective, you go to the racetrack, you cheer on your favorite team or driver or whatnot, and you know immediately after it's happened whether you've enjoyed it or not based on how well they've done. That's just simply how life goes. Whereas from a broadcast perspective, from a professional, from a working, you enjoy every victory with every team, but then you leave and you sort of just go quiet for a minute and everything settles down. So it's a very strange process to go through. But from a mentally healthy way to manage it, I'm not sure that that's the best, but it's just what I've learned has worked for me.
That's right. Well, you know what, that's the thing about all of it. It's what's useful to you and what's not. I don't know that any of it's really good or bad unless it's actually a negative coping skill. But I heard two things, and one is this notion of flow state, which there's a lot of studies out there, and flow state is accessible to all of us. And I find it so interesting when we feel very zoned in or zoned out, however you might see it, into a task at hand, whatever it may be. That's a place where our all of our systems are fully in the moment. Our central nervous system is there, our attention is there, and we're able to truly see and feel what's happening exactly for what it is. And then we're able to respond or react. We like to use the word respond more because it's a very intentional way of being in that space. And I think that's just important and accessible to all of us. But, we each bring to every moment a certain amount of life worry and a certain amount of tapestry of our memories and experiences. And, we're not always feeling able to get to those places, but I think about professional climbers and, that flow state required in those high, dangerous situations, but just believing in the possibility that all will be well. It's believing in possibility that you can win, believing in possibility that, your public, your audience, your fans can respond to what you're called to say or do or perform in a certain way. And it kind of goes hand in hand with being fully present, is bringing all your systems kind of, right there. And so we say a little bit about, how necessary it is in certain environments to be fully present. But, I'm thinking about like a morning routine. Do you have something do you read? Do you have coffee? Do you have certain things that sort of set your day for being the Shea you need to be on that day?
Oh, no. And it's really funny because I love coffee, but I don't need it. I enjoy the taste, but on a morning where I'm going into a work situation, every situation is different, because whether it's going into, for example, Road America this coming or the next weekend that we're going to, I'm going to be doing 2 races back to back on the Sunday, the WeatherTech first in the morning and then the Michelin Pilot Challenge later in the afternoon. And there's no preparation that I go through necessarily. I don't have a ritual. My biggest thing is I put my socks and shoes on left foot, left sock, right sock, left shoe, right shoe, but that's just old superstition from soccer days. There's
Yeah,
no, there's no vocal warm-ups, there's no any of that. You just
no, but
kind of go.
I love what you said because, and I'd like to move toward a conversation about stigma and stigma
Mm,
reduction and how we know it to be present in our own lives, what we might want to share in that space. But I also feel like that, what we love to tell people is, having positive coping skills or being able to access your present moment living skills doesn't have to be a practice. And I'm so happy you shared that. It's about doing something you do every day, all the time, a certain way. And
mhm.
so for you, it's the way you put on your socks and shoes. It's familiar, and you just do that. And that kind of plugs you into the habit you have, and it, and that's that. And, people will drive, maybe to school or to work, and they're, I don't have time for all of this. I'm, barely got my homework done. But you do have to walk from your car to the front door every day, right? So, for us, it's about just walk
Yeah,
into and don't do anything else, and
yeah.
that actually is sort of a coping skill. It's about not letting anything else in. And for someone at your level and that kind of career that you have that has a lot of moment to moment demands, you don't have time, right, to do all
No.
these extra rituals, which I find a lot of comfort in. They work for me, but others, they don't. But we can still have the same result. And that's where I want to talk for just a few minutes, Shea, about the idea of coming together in whatever way we can show up around stigma reduction. So
Yeah.
we know that in life, when we're suffering with our mental health, or we love someone who's suffering at a certain time, and life is kind of funny. If it's not you today, it will be you at some point, because life happens. But we don't often feel comfortable talking freely, especially in this environment that you operate. But say a little bit to us about maybe an experience around knowing what's required for you, or being just in life and relationship, and how stigma might be something you're out loud and proud to help me and help CKG Foundation just erase and eradicate. So I'd love to hear from you about that.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, as I talked about, you can't be mentally weak in racing. So of course, people don't want to come off as having any sort of flaw or any past issue that could be viewed as weakness. But we all have dealt with that. In my life, I had a very rough period of time when I was about 13 years old. And a woman who basically helped raise me, she was like my grandmother. She passed away very suddenly and unexpectedly. And I kind of went into this spiral where I felt very alone in the world, but I came through it. And I realized that you can come through these things. And then flash forward to being at university. I wound up in a situation where, again, I felt completely alone and I was deeply unhappy. But at the end of that was when I found racing, and when I found a family and a community that was willing to accept me. They didn't care where I'd come from, what I'd gone through, whatever negatives were in the past. And they were just willing to welcome me in with open arms. And that's kind of why I've stayed in racing, because it's such a wonderful family. But the fact that so many people go through this sense of loneliness and despair and depression, and now we're told, well, you can get medicine for that, you can get medicated, you can get antidepressants, you can whatever. The stigma attached to being on those drugs, to finding something that can help you, it's so negative. And whatever works for you. Exercise works for me. Endorphins are my best friend. If I get endorphins, I'm a wonderful, happy, beautiful person. But it's all about trying to figure out what makes you better, because it's so easy to want to sit in your room and just keep watching the TV shows. Just, you don't even have to click anymore. It just comes up automatically, and just spend life by yourself wallowing. But you don't have to do that. And you don't have to think that you're the only person who's ever felt that way, because all of us have. And there is this negative stigma about talking about the fact that we've been that down. The truth
Mhm.
is, no one who's high hasn't been low. And you just have to remember that it's worth climbing.
I'm really drawn to the story of you as a preteen,
Mm,
or early teen, experience something so devastating, and the fact that you can see in hindsight that it's as badly as you felt, you made it through. And
yeah.
that's the thing that we hope for for our communities and our teens that we serve is that, it's hard. You can do it, and we're here to help. You're not alone. And so, when we started this work 9 years ago, when my niece Cameron Gallagher had first passed away of an undiagnosed heart condition right after she crossed the finish line of a half marathon, and she had been suffering so deeply with stigma, on top of some intense mental health challenges. And she knew that if we knew better, we could do better. And she never held a grudge to anyone that didn't understand her darker days, but she got through them by suffering and by accepting the support around her, and by understanding that she may have depression, but she is not depression, and it comes and goes. And I know, especially when you're in your preteen to even through young adulthood, and even now, you're in a moment of darkness and you just can't see the light. But the bonus about being a little bit further down life's path is you have the wisdom to know you made it through, right? So you knew you made that through. You had another very specific period in your life where you were sensing that depressive time or a feeling of not knowing where you belonged, and then finding a family, and it was right there, a place you really became you and were thriving. And it was just a matter of allowing life to open up to you, and you did. And I think that's marvelous. And we all have a story, many stories to tell. But I think for us at the Cameron K. Gallagher Foundation, and we said it from the beginning, if you have a brain, you have mental health.
Yes.
And if you have a body, you have physical health. And I don't know anybody walking around a body without a brain. So they're both really, well, sometimes we might wonder.
Yeah, some drivers on the highway.
Exactly. Who knows? But, but the thing is, we are a whole person. We're a whole person with all these aspects of ourselves. And, I'm so fascinated by our collaborations with people in the professional racing world, whatever their role, because the response to our work and our mission has been overwhelmingly supportive and affirming. And yourself and Brian Sellers and some others that are just so enthusiastic to help erase stigma. And they come from backgrounds that are not necessarily typical. When your job is to try to go the fastest around people who are trying to go the fastest, I think about it and I have a stomach ache. I just don't know how. But the point is, that is not me. And I can appreciate and admire people like that. But at the end of the day, and as Brian has shown us over all these years, and many others, David Murray travels all the way in from Atlanta just to come to this event and to help us with stigma reduction and education, and help us fundraise to keep us in the mix of giving. All of our resources are free, as you know, Shea, and you've freely given your time to us to talk a little bit about your experience. But I want to close down with just a couple of questions, and I could talk to you forever, and this will be one of two, and I promise that'll be it.
No, I'm happy to give my time and talk about this. It's such a wonderful cause, and like you said, it doesn't get enough vocalization.
It doesn't, and not from people who are, not the cookie cutter person that has worn, a hat of, you're not a clinician, and all of that. So but I think as it relates to conversation and stigma reduction, I think it all starts with a conversation, and that conversation doesn't have to be perfect.
No.
And I think that some of us, feel like I don't know what to say, so they say nothing.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could say a little bit about that.
Well, and the scariest thing is saying those first words, and it doesn't matter what the situation is. If you're going to have a conversation that is going to make you uncomfortable, speaking up for the first time is what makes you most uncomfortable, and it all gets easier after that. But you have to know that you're not alone, and it only gets better after you speak up. That's the way that everything starts to move forward. And I've dealt with a lot of stuff by staying quiet. I've also dealt with a lot of stuff by speaking up, and you always feel better after saying something, because then you realize those negative voices that are in your head that are screaming at you day in and day out, they're not the loudest thing you're hearing. The love and support of your family and friends, that's what really matters.
That's true. That's true. And those negative voices, we know we have a negativity bias, the way we're sort of engineered, and it's to keep us safe. Our brains and bodies give us alert systems, a lot to keep us safe. And oftentimes that alert system is not sentient is the word I'm thinking of, but it's not the system that has a intentionality about it. And so, because you were left off of a group text that everyone's getting together to go do something,
Yes.
that sends the same alarm off as if you didn't put your shoes and socks on, Shea, and went outside in the snow, right? So it's like there's just some things about being human that are hard. But if you think about how beautiful that is, we have alarm systems to keep us alive, healthy, and safe. And those alarm systems don't feel good. Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of times our suffering, it doesn't feel good, and neither do those conversations. And, it's about asking for help is very hard when you're down. But if you're able to ask someone else, are you okay?
Yeah.
That may be hard for you, but that can be truly life-saving. And so that whole stigma around, someone seems alone and isolated, and who knows how they're going to respond to you. But just the fact that you asked is going to be big, and it takes a leap of faith and some courage. And I think we're in agreement that that's a cool thing to just know you have as a tool to help someone else. It's just those words, are you okay? It's very helpful. But I do want to ask, I like this whenever I get a chance to chat with someone, this is what I like to close with. If you now, Shea, as an adult with an intense career in intense environments, one you love and thrive with, and that you landed on after going through some suffering, knowing what you know now, what would you say to that 13-year-old girl who was suffering deeply and darkly? I know that what I want you to do is pick her up and give her a hug, but you can't. But what might you say to her now?
The funny thing is, and you'll have to forgive me for this because I am a massive nerd at heart, and I was a huge Harry Potter fan. I would actually take a line from the books: the ones that love us never really leave us.
Oh,
and you can always find them in here. And that's something that's taken a really long time to realize, but in coming to terms with the way that life works and the fact that everything does happen for a reason, and you gotta accept that, and maybe not agree with it, but accept it, and then figure out a way to create your own happiness. That's a really big lesson that I've learned, and I appreciate, and I continue to try and share.
Well, you're not alone in not only suffering but you're not alone in the Harry Potter fandom, because lots of people, lots of people do love Harry Potter, even non-nerds. I don't know why, nerds and non-nerds, we love it all.
Yep.
Well, I really, really am thrilled about our event on August 24th, and
me too.
We're happy to, if folks, are interested in learning about how that happens or how we pull that together, I'm happy to talk to you. There's also a page on our website that says Carding for CKG, and you can see a little bit more about how and why we do that and why we're engaging in these amazing audiences. But I do, Shea, I'm looking really forward to seeing you. We've met once in person, and that was last year, and you've stayed on my mind. I think, you're a person that carries this concern for people around, and you have good energy, and you're not afraid to talk about your own life experience. And I haven't seen you, and yet I've thought about you a lot. So we don't know what kind of influences and impacts we can be having all the time. And I can't wait to see all the drivers and our friends out there in a few weeks to really just band together, erase stigma, and just save lives.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it too. Last year, you guys placed me on a team that we finished second. And so got to try and do that or one better this year. But that
was amazing. And I will tell you, we don't place anybody, we draw out of a hat. But I'm sure now there's going to be people who pull out Shea Adam and they're like, yes,
Oh no, I was definitely the weak link on the
Well,
team.
no, you
It
thought
was
so. You thought so because you were the only one that didn't get paid to drive around a track really fast,
yep,
you
it's
know, at
true.
IMSA. So that's why
It's
you thought
true.
that. And you came in second. That was great.
Oh,
That was great. But always filled with passion about this work together. And I feel like this is that never ending conversation. We can talk forever, and we probably will again. And we'll share your wisdom and your goodness with the world as best we can. And we, invite you to do the same as you. Maybe I'll share the link around with people. So thank you so much, Shea. And I
thanks,
will see
Claire.
you quite soon.
See you in a couple weeks.
Yeah. And bye, everyone.